What began as an initiative to create a new visual identity for Carnegie Hall evolved into an opportunity to develop messaging, storytelling, and a finely tuned strategy to bring the new brand to life. Carnegie Hall's Chief Marketing Officer, Sara Villagio, and Bobby Martin, co-founder of Champions Design, will share the details from a 2-year collaborative process to update the iconic Carnegie Hall brand for the modern digital era. Understandably, most arts organizations do not have the resources of Carnegie Hall, but regardless of your organization's size, this session will provide you with a new perspective on the significance of brand, encourage you to ask some critical questions that you may not have considered important to branding, and inspire you with a modern visual identity that brings to life the vision of one of America's most quintessential concert halls. There will be no Q&A in this session, but you can reach out to each of the presenters directly through the conference platform. After this session, please join us for a focus session with Capacity Interactive's Director of Marketing and Content called Defining Your Brand Voice and Tone. Alternatively, there is a dedicated networking time if you prefer, although I highly recommend attending the focus session with Chrissy. Over to you, Sara and Bobby.
Hi there, my name is Sara Villagio, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Carnegie Hall. I'm a white cisgender woman with brown curly hair and brown eyes, and I'm sitting in my office at Carnegie Hall. Behind me, you can see some of my very interesting filing cabinets. Carnegie Hall is located in Manhattan, New York, on the unceded territory of the Munsee Lenape. I'm also here today very proudly representing my colleagues in the Marketing and Creative Services team at the Hall, and we are all guided by the artistic vision and leadership of Clive Gillinson, our Executive and Artistic Director.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Bobby Martin, and my pronouns are he and him. I'm a 5'7" African-American with a bald head and a fuzzy black beard. And I'm talking to you all today from an office in the East Village of New York City. And this is also the unceded territory of the Munsee Lenape tribe. I am the co-founder of Champions Design. We are a branding and design agency, and we have been around since 2010. I'll tell you a little bit more about who we are in a second, but now what we'll do is walk you through what we plan to share with you today. All right. So today's agenda, we're going to start off by giving you some background of how the work got started and background on Carnegie Hall. From there, I will be introducing you to the new Carnegie Hall design system. We'll be followed by how we debut the brand, and then we'll leave you with some of the lessons that we've learned along the way. To get started, I'll pass it to Sara Villagio.
Thanks, Bobby. Okay, let's take it back, all the way back to the year 2005. And here you see Bobby and me working together at Jazz at Lincoln Center in the marketing department, participating in the office's holiday decorating contest. The marketing team had very creatively decided to decorate our space in the theme of New Orleans Christmas. And Bobby drew the lucky straw to burst out of his office in costume as a Mardi Gras Santa Claus with all kinds of fun accessories adorning him. So if we fast forward to today, you can see us in a little bit more of a serious conversation about our work together to update the brand of Carnegie Hall. This is us walking through the offices, and you can see some of that Carnegie steel right there. And I would like to say that I think that both of our senses of style have improved just a little bit over the last 15 years or so. But let's take it back even further. Andrew Carnegie's Music Hall first opened in 1891, and here you see an image of the hall from 1899. Since then, Carnegie Hall has set the international standard for musical excellence and welcomed a who's who of artists from all over the globe to this magical stage. From Tchaikovsky on opening night to the Beatles making their very first US concert appearance to Judy Garland, so many artists have stepped foot on this stage. And also in 1960, the hall was saved from demolition by the famous violinist, educator, and activist Isaac Stern, who you can see here. At that time, the nonprofit Carnegie Hall Corporation was founded to run the hall and facilitate its programs, and that's who all of us at Carnegie Hall work for today. Since then, Carnegie Hall renovated and opened Zenkel Hall, our most flexible and contemporary performance space. We launched the Wild Music Institute, or WMI for short, our education and social impact programming arm, which reaches more than 800,000 people each year. And we opened the Resnick Education Wing, which you see here, 24 spaces dedicated to making music, learning music, and sharing music with people of all ages. Today, we present about 170 concerts in our season, and we welcome another 700 plus rentals a year. So let's get real. When we first started to talk about this project, I have to admit that it was one of both the most terrifying and thrilling projects I could ever have imagined. And it was really exciting to think about, but I still feel that way all the way through to today. It's both terrifying and thrilling to be responsible for updating this brand. And let me tell you a little bit about how it started and introduce you to some of the people that were integral to the project. In my first month at Carnegie Hall, I met Bernie Hallstein, who is the hall's wonderful, talented design director. And Bernie, in that intro conversation, shared with me that he had something called the Drawer of Dreams. What, may you ask, is the Drawer of Broken Dreams? Well, it's the place where design concepts go to live when they just haven't gone through all the necessary approvals. And Bernie and his talented team of designers had many, many, many things living in this drawer. In fact, there are several inches thick of design concepts in there. But it was part of this original conversation in which Bernie shared the idea of me, or the question rather, of whether it might be time to look at the overall brand system for Carnegie Hall. And he started to talk about some of the design challenges the team was facing. He got me really excited about this idea. And of course, though, we wanted to take our time and think about the best way to move it forward. So we started by looking at the brand assets that the team was working with. It was important for me to wrap my head around everything that they were using, but also to get a sense of the type of work that the team was doing. And let me tell you, this team, made up of graphic designers, editors, and production, really works hard all year long on all kinds of different things. So what you're looking at here is an overview of our brand assets, including our logos and logo lockups. You'll see some marks for our sub identities like Carnegie Hall Citywide, our free outdoor concert series, programs from the Wild Music Institute that I mentioned earlier, typeface, colors, the famous joke, of course, audience members, the artists on stage. This is the starting point of the brand toolkit that we were working with. I'm going to take you through a few of these assets and introduce you to them along with the design challenges that we were facing. So first up, the Carnegie Hall logo. This version of the logo was introduced sometime in the late 80s. And if you can think back to that time, there was not a need to design for digital first back then. So the logo wasn't designed with that in mind. The hall was producing beautiful print materials along with all other kinds of things, but certainly not necessarily for the web. In all the years since, only a couple of minor updates were made to that mark, including removing the thin black line that you saw in the last version, as well as refining the typeface so that it was a bit more consistent with our marketing materials. And that was all the updates that were made. That said, this logo still was a challenge when it came to digital placements. You can see a few of them here. But one of the things that really got in our way was the fact that the logo was designed to be horizontally aligned. So when it came to more narrow spaces, it was a little bit trickier. It was harder to read, it was a bit inflexible, and it just didn't render and speak the way we hoped it would. So that was one challenge we were facing. And when you think about how this might show up across formats, that was true as well in social media, video, etc. The next item I wanted to share is what you see here, the Carnegie Hall C, which was introduced as part of the last major brand update around 2008 or so. And it's important to note that at that moment, the organization wasn't quite ready to undertake the idea of updating the logo. So they started here. The asset that they designed needed to work with that logo. And you can see that the C played a pretty big role for a number of years. At the time that I joined the team, they started to wonder whether we had maximized its expression and what role it could play moving forward. That brings me to color. Now, if you were looking at this presentation outside of the context of a Carnegie Hall brand presentation, you might see red, white, and black up on screen and think of any number of brands. So, while certainly recognizable and distinct to Carnegie Hall, especially the red, it wasn't necessarily unique in general from a branding perspective. So, color was one thing we wanted to look at. I also should add here that it didn't necessarily do the work that we were hoping to when it came to presenting, engaging with, and connecting with all of the audiences of the many different programs that Carnegie Hall offers today. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Another key piece here, photography. So, as a presenting organization, and I'm sure many of you in the room, the virtual room, wherever you're sitting right now, can relate to this. We receive photography assets from all of the artists that appear on our stages, which means that each of those photos comes with its own style, own unique style. And our task is to figure out how to align all of those styles across our marketing materials. That has proven to be really challenging. How do you take all of these distinct assets and make sure they're consistent and represent your season well? So that was another challenge that we were facing. Also, as a nonprofit, we don't always have the budget to stage a photo shoot. And for us in particular, that might be a really tough schedule to align. So here you see the Wild Music Institute programs. I wanted to come to this and share this because I think it gives you a little bit of an idea of the complexity of the work, the fact that there's overlap in a lot of different ways, but there's so many different audiences that need to be spoken to in different ways to engage around the programs that we offer. So when you layer the graphics that we were using at the time over that audience map, you start to get a sense of how the brand had stretched over time in order to meet those needs and the objectives of our colleagues who were developing those programs. Finally, when you take the entire brand and go through the same exercise of looking at all of the assets that we were working with at this moment, put them up side by side, and understood where it had stretched over the years, you could start to see where there might be different opportunities to explore. It's important to note that it really wasn't necessarily about the brand, it was about the organization. In the last 15 years or so, under Clive's leadership, the organization had stretched and expanded and evolved and moved in so many different and new and exciting directions. And the brand assets were working really hard to keep up with all of that. But over time, as we tried to work on representing all of this different work, it became a little more challenging to remain cohesive and consistent. So this was one of the starting points that we had when we looked at the brand. From here, we started with a set of questions. I should add that if you've listened to Eric's podcast with Clive Gillinson, our executive and artistic director, from a couple years ago, you'll remember that he always says, start with the questions you are asking rather than the answers you are seeking. So my good colleague, Kathleen Chaparelli, who is one of the partners in launching this work together with me, we sat down and we talked through some of the questions that we had before we wanted to even dig into it. So first up, how do we best evolve the brand? Note the choice of the word evolution over revolution for sure, because you certainly just don't go through a revolution with a brand like Carnegie Hall's. From there, is it time to move on? Some of these assets had been in use for a while. Are there things that we should consider leaving behind? What role does something like the seed play? It had a very big part for the last 10 years or so. And does it play a supporting role in the future, or does it go away? Who knows? What can we claim as uniquely ours? What brand assets actually are recognizable instantly when somebody thinks about Carnegie Hall? And how do all of those sub-identities fit? All of the programs and audiences of the Wild Music Institute, how do they fit under the core identity of Carnegie Hall and come together in a way that is exciting and interesting and engaging and relevant to all of those different groups of people? And of course, getting to audiences, how do we stay connected to those that have been loyal to us for so many years, subscribers and donors, and make sure they still feel connected, but also welcome all of those new audiences that I'm talking about and the ones that we aspire to talk to in the future. And of course, last but not least, how do we best do it all online? Any organization doing a project like this is, I think, one of the key questions that we're addressing. So absolutely online. And with that, I'm going to turn it to Bobby.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Now, what I'll do is walk you through how we developed a design system to address a lot of those questions that Sarah and her team were asking. Let me give you a little bit of an introduction in who we are. So I started in the very beginning by saying who I am, but I represent Champions Design, which is a branding and design agency we started in 2010. And we really focus on building design systems for companies and organizations that we really believe in and that are doing really exciting things out in the world. Now, in doing that, we have to develop some type of process that allows us to reach the very best opportunities and work and to get the best outcome no matter what the project is. So when we started working with Carnegie Hall, we embarked on our four-step process, which begins with research. Sarah talked about how important questions are to their process, and questions are equally important to our process. We do a lot of asking questions, we do a lot of listening, we do a lot of gathering of information to inform the work that we're doing, to understand the audience, and to challenge biases, to make sure that we are aware of all of the different people and points of views that are involved. From there, we start to build the strategy. And the strategy is the inspiration that fuels the work that is to come. The strategy is also the foundation for which everything is built. As we'll talk about a little bit in this presentation, we develop tools during our strategy phase to help to guide the work as well as gain consensus from all of the different constituents, stakeholders on board. So we were able to do this first with the marketing and creative services team, but then Sarah's leadership, with Sarah's leadership, she was able to bring in so many different people to introduce them to the strategic development for why we would be moving forward and why that was important. And a lot of that she highlighted in the setup that she just walked you through. Only after we've gone through research and strategy, then do we start making things. And we try everything. We make. And that's what we call our design exploration phase. So we have a two-pronged approach to design. First, we just try it all. We put things up on the wall, we tear them down, we critique, we refine, and we just do this broad exploration to see what is going to work, because there's so many different ways that you can actually interpret this strategy. From there, in the case of Carnegie Hall, we worked really closely with the marketing and creative services team to then focus in on one key direction that was most appropriate and most exciting for Carnegie Hall to move forward with. And that is where we get into the development. The design development phase is when we are building out the full identity system. We're thinking about the photography, the color, the typefaces, the logos, and how they all have to work with each other through layout and other interactivities. After that design system is fully developed, we roll our sleeves up and we get it done and we prepare for launch. And this is the implementation phase. And implementation can go on for as long as needed. It can be something that is that we are working with you closely on from the very beginning and through the different curveballs that come along the way. And that's what's really important about this process, is because we learn as much about the ways that you're working in order to develop a system that meets those needs. So this is the champions process. So let me walk you through a little bit of how we use this process to develop the work with Carnegie Hall. We started by asking even more questions. Questions like, why is now the right time to do this brand update? These are questions that we have to ask. It's a hard question, but it also helps everyone to really align on the key reasons for making this change, which also then reinforces how other people then are able to engage, and we're able to gain consensus. What makes you different from other cultural organizations? This is quite similar to some of the questions that Sarah was asking. So they were able to actually come to the table with answers already prepared because they had had so many discussions around some of these. But what we're able to do is then start to parse these through the lens of brand and design. What is your vision for the future? What we need to do is understand the ambition for the brand so that we can build a roadmap to get there. What does the public value most? What you're working on as an internal team, as the in-house team, as those that are living and breathing the brand on a day-to-day, may be very different for those who are engaging with your brand for the first time. And so what we have to do is try to understand, what is your greatest brand awareness? What are the things that people think about when your name comes up as a brand? And so you'll see some ways that we started to determine that with Carnegie Hall. So one, what does the public value? But then also, what are the most recognizable parts of the brand identity? Is it the logo? Is it color? Is it imagery and photography? And lastly, we like to ask about traditions and rituals, especially for an organization that's been around for a while. Carnegie Hall is 130 years old. So you better believe that there are some rituals and traditions that audiences have that Carnegie Hall has developed and established just because of the organic quality of an organization. And so these are some of the things that we wanted to be able to tap into because it helps us to tell an authentic story. Now, who did we ask these questions of? Well, we talked with senior leadership, we talked with the board of trustees, but we had several meetings with these different groups to be able to ask questions from a variety of different points of view. We spoke with education and social impact programs, we spoke with ticket holders and subscribers, as well as, of course, marketing and creative services. We were there with us the whole way. We spoke with PR, public relations, as well as the digital and technology teams because we know how important digital and digital applications are to Carnegie Hall because they want to reach the broadest range of audience of people possible. And so all of these different people contributed key information to help us to break down biases that we may have come into this process with and understand what was really, really important to both Carnegie Hall and their audience. So some of the things that we heard, starting with the creative services and marketing team, we heard that we need tools that are flexible enough to allow us to be creative. And how can we do all of that while still being Carnegie Hall? That was a key one. That was a really tough nut to crack, but we had a lot of fun developing a plan around that. And we needed to do that because we learned that the creative services and marketing teams, they create tons and tons of materials every year. In this case, Carnegie Hall's creative services team creates over 2,000 individual pieces a year. So they needed a plan that was going to be implementable. They needed a system that was going to be flexible. How far can we push, we asked. Now, we heard from those that are working closely with donors, the ones that are giving a lot of the money to help keep the doors open, that the donors are actually really open to change. But we had to make sure that we communicate the reasons and make them part of the process. So storytelling was key, not just in brand, but also in the process of creating and developing this new approach to the brand. I promised that I would get to some of the things that the public valued most. We heard that the key brand awareness was around two words: Carnegie Hall. Carnegie Hall, Carnegie Hall. Now, of course, a lot of people know the joke too: practice, practice, practice. But Carnegie Hall was most important. And so that was a key insight to the work that would then be developed. And we heard many, many, many really important bits of feedback and input as we asked these questions. But in the last thing that I'll share with you today is that we learned that Carnegie Hall has had a challenge in communicating the totality of all that they do. Because a lot of times people would know the joke or they know some of those iconic performances, but they may not have known about the broad reach that Carnegie Hall has and has had in educating the youth, in educating educators, and in really empowering and inspiring the community. Another key part of our research is my favorite part because we get to dive into the archives. And for an organization like Carnegie Hall, their archives is tremendous. It's just a spectacular collection. The first part of the diving into the archives process was we got to have a tour with Mr. Archives himself. Carnegie Hall's key activist, Carnegie Hall's key archivist, Gino, was able to give us a tour. And this was some kind of tour. We toured for over 3 hours, all the nooks and crannies, the behind the stages, we went into the rafters and we learned all about Carnegie Hall from the person who actually was the founder of the Carnegie Hall archives. Now, since 1986, Gino and his team have collected over 300,000 individual pieces of Carnegie Hall ephemera, and that is from over 50,000 concerts. So we were able to dive into boxes and boxes and files of this collection. And you could see that that name, Carnegie Hall, came up many, 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 many times. Here in the actual stamps, the nameplates, when things are printed, on program covers, on annual reports, on flyers and ads. And what was so fascinating about this is there were so many different articulations of that name and the way that that name Carnegie Hall was written, and even how the performers or the building was represented. We even found this little gem from the 50th anniversary, this little stamp that just had Carnegie Hall and written out in this really beautiful way. And it's just these little kind of bits of information that we just loved as designers and the design team and our strategy team. We heard a lot about the ring of lights at Carnegie Hall. So these are an iconic ring. There's an exact number that Gino could tell you about, but there's this iconic ring of lights at the top of Stern Auditorium that was then used in a lot of different materials, from annual report covers to program covers and others, even on the flags in the front of the building. While we were digging through these files, we noticed a couple of things that were in the archive with us, these physical pieces. One was this bench that as soon as we walked in, I just was really curious about. And so we asked about this bench, and it turns out that those beautiful red seats that you have in Stern Auditorium that you would sit on if you go to any of the performances in Stern uh, were not the original color. The original color of the seats in Stern Auditorium are this beautiful and distinctive rose color, a color that I've never seen in any other venue. And so that was a little kind of gem that just stuck in our files or kind of a feather we put in our cap as we continue to do this work. So after doing our strategy phase of asking questions and diving into the archive, we built out strategy. Now, in the strategy, what we knew from the very beginning is we had to move from complex to united. We had to move from generic to distinctive. Now, I'm not saying that Carnegie Hall was generic by any means, but we knew that we wanted to make and highlight even more distinctive characteristics to make Carnegie Halls and to highlight Carnegie Hall in an even more unique way. And lastly, we knew that the tools needed to move from limited because of the introduction of so many different things like social media, digital applications, motion and video, to something that's much more flexible. And so these are some goals that we started on from the very beginning. Now, our wonderful strategy team led by Karina Sandoval was also able to put together a working plan that we call the brand pyramid. And this really mapped out the strategy in one snapshot. And the marketing and creative service team especially loved this because of how simple yet powerful this tool is. So in this brand pyramid, what is Carnegie Hall? What do they provide? Extraordinary performances, quality education and professional development, and social impact programs. But how do they do it? They do it by asking questions, creating opportunities, curating experiences, building common ground, and exceeding expectations. Why? Pulled right out from the mission, Carnegie Hall does it because they believe in the transformative power of music as a catalyst for human growth. Now that we have this brand pyramid this was really, it's a pyramid, but it's leading the way. It's pointing upward, so it's kind of our guiding light. But then we were able during our interview phase, when we were talking with so many different people, we were able to ask them about some characteristics. If they could describe Carnegie Hall in a couple of words, one word, two word, three words that really make up Carnegie Hall, what would they be? And we got tons and tons of words back. We just heard so many interesting descriptive words, such as Carnegie Hall is active and accomplished. Carnegie Hall is dynamic and creative. Carnegie Hall is smart and masterful. However, we also heard that Carnegie Hall can be inaccessible or intimidating. It can somewhat feel aloof or, misunderstood. And so this grouping of words provided some that could be really inspiring for us to work toward. And it also highlighted some key challenges that we needed to be aware of and develop a plan to address. And what we had to do is whittle all of these words down to three key characteristics that best summed up Carnegie Hall, that best summed up the Carnegie Hall of the past, the Carnegie Hall that we know now, and the Carnegie Hall of the future. And so Champions team couldn't do that by ourselves. We couldn't just go back into our little room and a vacuum and create this. We had to do it with the Carnegie Hall team. So Sara and her team, as well as our Champions strategy and design teams, got together and we started to parse through all of these words and started to weigh the ones that were more important and the ones that we wanted to really highlight, and also start to then think about how we could use these as a real guiding point for where we would go. So what we came up with was Carnegie Hall. We are magical. When you attend a Carnegie Hall concert, or even if you engage with Carnegie Hall through a digital performance or some kind of experience outside of the walls of Carnegie Hall, it's a truly magical experience. Carnegie Hall features so many different genres of music, and they have their different stages and their different ways of helping others access that music, as well as being able to provide music and music training and music education to audiences of all shapes and sizes and all ages. And so Carnegie Hall diversity is at the core of who Carnegie Hall is and where they're going. And lastly, visionary. From the very moment that Andrew Carnegie laid the cornerstone in 1891 on the corner of 57th and 7th Avenue, Carnegie Hall has been visionary. Carnegie Hall is a visionary to this day, and it's that visionary spirit that is guiding Carnegie Hall into the next 130 years. So these key characteristics came together to help to focus and crystallize that strategy and enable us to be creative and to creatively design a new logo for Carnegie Hall. So what I'm going to do is going to share with you the logo launch video now. Thank you.
For 130 years, Carnegie Hall has invited passersby at 57th Street and 7th Avenue to glimpse the marquee names on the concert schedule, listings that have included some of the most legendary artists of all time. Inspired by the beautiful stained glass lettering atop these poster cases, our new logo captures this magical history while guiding us into the future.
So now you've been introduced to the new Carnegie Hall logo, inspired by the stained glass in the front of the building. It's been there for many, many, many years, and we just uncovered it. And so we wanted to find a gem from that archive that was true to those key characteristics of Carnegie Hall. So we created the new Carnegie Hall brand mark or logo. But then how do we connect the dots to all of the different things that Carnegie Hall does? Well, we know that that Carnegie Hall name, that brand awareness is so important. So with Carnegie Hall citywide or their festivals, Carnegie Hall's name is now used in conjunction with that. Whether you are going to the shop or you are becoming a member, Carnegie Hall's name is there at front and center. So Carnegie Hall is now able to get even more recognition for all of that work they're doing out in the world, because we know that they have had trouble communicating the totality of what they do. So we're starting here to build this system to help to address that challenge. The next thing we had to do is develop some tools to help them continue to connect those dots. The first is that recognizable Carnegie Hall Red. These are those seats. If you go to a concert at Carnegie Hall now in Stern Auditorium, you'll see these beautiful deep red seats. And Carnegie Hall has had red as a core color palette from the very beginning. But there was a reason why I put a focus on those beautiful benches that were in the archive room, because we were able to bring in the rows from those original seats to become a key addition to the new Carnegie Hall color palette. Also, with that stained glass windows, with the blue and the light that shines through those stained glass windows, it creates this vibrant blue that's really hard to capture. But here we were able to bring in a specific color that represented Carnegie Hall and blue and rose in conjunction with the red. And so now Carnegie Hall is able to speak in a way that's even more unique. They have layout possibilities that are more flexible than they have before. And Carnegie Hall is able to get recognition for more of that work that they're doing. Now, when Carnegie Hall is starting to speak about the different work that they're doing, they're starting to tell people about all of the different activities. How do they do it? They're doing it with messaging, they're doing it with language, they're doing it with type. And so fonts and typefaces became even more important. In that original overview of the brand assets that Sara shared, there were several fonts that the Carnegie Hall team used. However, with the creative services team, we were able to whittle down the fonts in use to only 2 brand fonts. One is this classic and beautiful serif font, the one with the little feet. It's called Fournier. It's just this really beautiful typeface that sums up a lot of that kind of classic feel that you might think of when you picture Carnegie Hall. But then we paired that with a beautiful and warm, modern sans serif typeface that is now used in contrast to the traditional typeface. And together, this helps to represent more of that totality, more of the breadth of what Carnegie Hall is able to do. So we actually gave them less typefaces that allows them to do more. The last thing that allowed them to do more with type was to then infuse it with life and magic. Something we call magical typography is the ability to bring the typography and the messaging to life, especially important across digital and social media. And lastly, we created a flexible layout structure, starting with a logo that can turn on its side, that can go from a full horizontal logo to something that's stacked on 2 lines, to even be cropped and become more bold and dynamic and innovative and provocative. So this visionary spirit is now coming through in the simple layout opportunities that the team now has at their fingertips that they didn't have before. So you can see the flexibility literally coming through in these different ways that the brand is applied. And Sara mentioned some of the challenges with photography. So we've looked at a few different ways to address that. In some cases, like we're showing here, photography might be simplified to black and white. And that black and white makes a variety of photography from a variety of different areas come together and to have a little bit more cohesion. And then we also introduced a handful of other tactics, such as focusing in on the image and dramatic crops. And I'm going to share with you now another video that introduces another important icon that's used specifically across digital applications.
In 1890, the finest steel from Andrew Carnegie's mills was used in the hall's construction. Steel that continues to make it possible for the hall to physically evolve. Almost 125 years later, renovations uncovered one of the original beams embossed with the Carnegie name. This stamp captures the enduring magic of the hall, providing inspiration for our new monogram.
So now you can see Carnegie Hall has a unique new logo, that brand mark that says Carnegie Hall in a more flexible way than they ever have before. And they have a contrasting element that's more informal, that's more digital friendly, a very digital friendly mascot, or not mascot, what am I talking about? This more digital friendly monogram that is used in conjunction with the brand mark. And so with these two, we're continuing to allow for that system to reach a broader range of audiences in a broader way than they ever have before. As you saw in the video, the monogram was created and inspired by some steel that we also saw in the archive that was stamped with the Carnegie name. But we also loved that it had these little hints of musical notes, and it felt kind of musical in a lot of ways with this kind of beautiful kind of rendering of the monogram. And that was equally important when we thought about social media avatars or thought about other ways that the Carnegie Hall name had to come through, but didn't have really the landscape to be able to say the full name. So we were able to embody and evoke a lot of the qualities of Carnegie Hall through this monogram. So now that we have that full design system fully developed, and we were just starting to think about implementation, we were working really closely with Sarah's team, and then we were thrown a few curveballs, right, Sarah?
That's right. Yes, I think this screaming baseball aptly represents how I felt when some of these curveballs came our way. But let me tell you a little bit about some of them. And Bobby and I are going to go back and forth on this part. So thanks, Bobby. That was a great overview. So bringing it back to the Wild Music Institute, not because it's a challenge whatsoever, because this work is some of my favorite at Carnegie Hall. I'll say that. But when it came to the core identity of this project, we had gotten to a point around February 2020. And that was, of course, before COVID-19. We'll get to that in a second. But we had come to this point where we felt we'd really explored the core system. And we'd even gone so far as to present it to trustees and to others. We've gotten buy-in across the organization. And then a few people kind of raised their hands. And it was colleagues in the Wild Music Institute teams. It was some of our own graphic designers who said to us at this moment, we've done a great job so far, but we've really only just begun to scratch the surface of what is possible to represent the programs of the Wild Music Institute. And they asked these questions. Are we relevant enough to the audiences that we need to speak to for these programs? Are we engaging enough? Are we connecting with them in the right way? So I'm going to turn it to Bobby to share a little bit of how we addressed this, because we took a step back at this point and decided to actually extend the project so that we could do a deeper dive into this area.
And a deeper dive is exactly what we did. Thank you, Sarah. What we were able to do is go back and ask more questions. So, I think it's really still true to what Clyde was saying is we begin with the questions. So we went back and asked even more questions specific to Carnegie Hall's education and social impact initiatives. And so we spoke with so many people within the Wild Music Institute, and we were able to learn a lot. And we found out that there's just so many different people that are being touched and kind of that are being connected to by the education group. So within the education department, there are so many different ways that Carnegie Hall needs to speak. They need to speak to audiences that are a little bit older, might be music educators or those that are professionals, as well as those that could be infants or just their first time even hearing music and trying to just figure out, like, how does this work into my everyday life, and everything in between. And in the process, what we needed to do is we will figure out, could there be a silver bullet, one solution for everything? No. We knew that the Wild Music Institute needed to be even more flexible to be able to speak to that broad range of audiences. So we thought about how the tone would come across. Could it be some things be less playful and others be more playful? We thought about how there might be some things that are more kind of organization to the organization, or like even within the organization, versus things that are really out there and public facing. And then we also thought about so many partnerships are important to the work that the Wild Music Institute does. And in some cases, Carnegie Hall will take a step back, and those partnerships and those programs are even more important. And so there's times when Carnegie Hall becomes more of the platform for those programs. And then there's others that Carnegie Hall is clearly leading the way. So we needed to think of how we could develop this addendum to the identity system to again speak to both Carnegie Hall as well as Wild Music Institute in their education and social impact programs. Now, when we're speaking to infants or teens or adults, we knew that we had to, one, make sure that Carnegie Hall was front and center because we wanted Carnegie Hall to make sure that they got recognition for all of that work that they were doing. But then the name of the Education and Social Impact Program, the department, is the Wild Music Institute. So we brought in that name in a traditional logo lockup, as we had shared with the other area when we started to show how we connected the dots. But here with WMI, the Wild Music Institute was introduced using that modern sans serif typeface. Now that allowed for Carnegie Hall's Wild Music Institute to span that broad audience while also work well across digital. Education is doing a lot of different programming across digital applications. And what we were able to do is help the Carnegie Hall's Wild Music Institute programs have a little bit of distinctiveness amongst all of Carnegie Hall. So let me talk a little bit more about what that means. Carnegie Hall Wild Music Institute, there in the top left, and this layout structure then provides this platform for the program, placing musical connections forward. Or if it's the National Youth Ensembles, you can see now it takes on this different color, and National Youth Ensembles being NYO, NYO2, NYO Jazz, then take more of a front role. For music educators workshop or summer music educators, then again, we introduce a color specific to this program. They're kind of punctuated with the Carnegie Hall Wild Music Institute logo in red, and it allows for the ability to speak to a slightly different audience in a slightly and maybe more appropriate way. When you're speaking to teens, it takes on a little bit more edgier purple color, and again, it allows for a bit more flexibility within their education and social impact programs. And one of the fun things that our team was able to do with the creative services team is start to think about how we bring in even more artfulness into this world. And so for programs such as Link Up, the iconic Carnegie Hall Wild Music Institute Link Up, we were able to develop this beautiful mosaic of illustration and iconography that is made up of musical instrumentation specific to the different programs. Or when we're speaking to both mothers and fathers and young babies, little infants, for the Lullaby Project, it was so important to get the owls right, and to get those owls just right, to get the stars, and to make the Lullaby Project really special for that group. And I know because I have a little one at home. Similar to Big Note, Little Note, we kind of went straightforward with this one, right? It's the big note and the little note, but that was so appropriate. We refine the notes, and again, you have this warm and playful color palette. So you can see how with Carnegie Hall's Wild Music Institute, we were able to open it up a little bit to provide a little bit more key nuanced information for those very specific audiences. And that is what makes this addendum so important, because we had to address that curveball with a way to speak to the specific needs of Carnegie Hall's Wild Music Institute. Next up, Sarah.
Thanks, Bobby. You did a great job of covering that. I think that added an extra 30 pages to our brand book, probably. So there's that.
At least.
But of course, I think the worst challenge or curveball that any of us could have come to any of us was COVID-19 and the pandemic. So I mentioned that the Wild Music Institute project had kicked off around February 2020. And suddenly our stages went dark, just like everyone's. And Carnegie Hall itself went into crisis mode, managing hundreds of event cancellations and refunds and everything else, resources just stopping. I mean, it was really, as I'm sure all of you know, an incredibly challenging time for the hall. So naturally, that brought us to a whole new set of questions. It was really time we took a step back. Naturally, this work took a little bit of a backseat for me because I was focusing on some of the other things that we had to deal with at the time. But we started to ask questions again and really wondered whether, what was this the right time? How would Carnegie Hall be perceived if it were to launch a new brand update in the midst of a global pandemic? That was a real question that we asked ourselves. In addition to that, we had started this project long before COVID-19 was part of our reality. So the work, was it still moving in the right direction? Did it still hold up even in this new set of circumstances and in this new world that we were living in? We had a lot of internal conversations about that, all the way up to our trustees again, about what direction we might go in. And of course, we worked with Bobby and the team at Champions to have that conversation, so that not only were we looking at it from the inside Carnegie Hall lens, but what was happening outside of us, especially in the brand landscape, to compare to and learn from. So I'll turn it back to Bobby on that front.
Well, thank you, Sarah. And I'll just add that this was a curveball for everyone, and it was especially a curveball for us, a brand consultancy. So what we then started to do is take a step back ourselves and do what we do best. We started to strategize because we knew that we were working with partners such as Carnegie Hall that were reeling from the shutdown of their stages. And also we were in the middle of this project. And so what we were able to do is to start to think about what the role of a brand should be, as well as a brand relaunch, what it could be during this time. And at the time, we didn't know that even when we'd be making this video for you guys today, that we'd still be really very much in the pandemic. But what I'll do is talk a little bit about some lessons that we learned and some thoughts that we were able to put together to help organizations like Carnegie Hall make some really important decisions around brand during this time. We have an article on our website that speaks to some of these learnings, and this was written by our lead strategist on Carnegie Hall, Karina Sandoval, as well as one of our other partners, founding partners at Champions, Jennifer Kynan. So what they were able to do is parse through a lot of different some of our current clients and partners, as well as others that are out there in the world doing some really innovative work within this challenging time. And so what we learned from this research is we started to map out a few different ways for brands to think about launching during times of crisis. And so we learned some things you might recognize, or now kind of going through it, they might be quite obvious. But the first thing we need to do is pump the brakes. We needed to stop or pause and assess the brand and think about the big picture. So what was driving the work before the pandemic, and does that change when you start to think about the long-term goals, when you start to think about the long game? So what is the big picture, and how can you stick to that plan? However, you have to also reflect. So one of the other key points here is you have to then consider how the world's changed. I mean, we've gone through so many changes in the past couple of years, and all of these obviously will affect brands. And so what can brands do about it? What can brands do about this changing world? And will a rebrand actually empower you to better fulfill your mission? That was one of the key areas that we had to discuss and some hard conversations that we were to have with Carnegie Hall, because that mission of providing the transformative power of music to everyone was really important. And so assessing the different decisions at every single level was really, really important. And then from there, think about the plan that you're on, think about that roadmap, and revise it. Make amendments, because that old plan that you had is probably not feasible anymore. But if you go back to that strategy, that's your foundation. So how do you reach your community? How do you become more effective? How can you be more efficient? How can you be community led and not moment led? How can you make sure that the work that you're doing and that mission and the reason for being is still that guiding light, and making sure that you are addressing the immediate challenges as well as planning for the long term. And lastly, after you've gone through these 3 steps, you can consider launching or doing your relaunch. So, whatever you do, as you can see here, do it with purpose. Proceed with purpose. Speak openly. We've talked so much about storytelling. Transparency is equally important. Talk openly about those reasons for change if you needed to make a revision to your plan. Talk openly about your plan for launch. Talk openly about the community that you're a part of and that they are a part of. And then follow that vision. Use that vision to really guide the way. So this launch plan was something that really helped us both as a agency, as well as helped our partners like Carnegie Hall during these really tough times.
So, of course, we did eventually decide to launch, which you now know. We included the brand update as part of our season announcement, which had been delayed until this past June. And you can see the New York Times announcement here. Keynote, which is that I don't think the New York Times got the memo about our updated flags, but we will come to that in a minute. So, yeah, let's go to our final curveball. The last curveball I wanted to point out or share was that, of course, we were going through this whole process and thinking about all of the ways in which the brand would be expressed online in digital platforms. How might Carnegie Hall best express itself and best show up on these new areas and the areas we hadn't even considered yet? But again, then it came to, are we digital enough? And what did that mean to us? To us, that meant, are we meeting web accessibility standards, especially with the new color system that we had put forward to be a part of this update? So the team at Carnegie Hall went through a pretty extensive testing process to assess whether those colors would meet web accessibility standards. And in doing that, refined them to a point in which they were ready to get there, but also learned that the ways the colors were being reproduced on different types of materials could be inconsistent. So we had to then go through the steps of understanding how might the color show up on all kinds of different mediums, whether it was printed paper or decals on the building or the web or social media, whatever it may be. So I'll toss it back to Bobby to share some more on the design side around that.
Well, thank you, Sarah. I mean, it's so interesting thinking about digital first, because we have to think about the way that color comes across on different screens, whether that's a high-end, high-def screen or some of the smaller ones or older ones. We had to think about how to then make sure that the color can be consistent from screen to print applications, whether you're printing on coated or uncoated paper stock, whether you're using digital printing or offset. And all of these different factors really contributed to what is the final color, what is the best color for the Carnegie Hall brand palette. And this was something that the Carnegie Hall's internal creative services team really got into and was able to refine and pinpoint. And we were, the champions team was really excited to see where it net out, because the next thing that we were able to do is finally launch. So we'll talk a little bit about the brand debut.
Oh, we're running through time, so we're going to go through this quickly. So, Bobby, this one is on you to start. Go ahead.
Okay, sure. So, with the brand debut, finally, after all of that work, we were able to then reveal. So, those beautiful red flags now hang in front of the Carnegie Hall building at 57th and 7th Avenue with that new, more flexible logo on the flags. And for the 2021-22 season and for upcoming seasons, part of the strategy is to introduce a season color for the season related materials. So here you can see in the 3 sheets or even across digital how there's a new kind of plum color when it speaks to those season assets. And we were really excited to see how that flexible logo, the magical typography, the color palette comes through really in a bold, new, and exciting way across all of the season launch materials. And similarly, it can take a step back and become a little bit more serious or straightforward when going into more of your day-to-day materials, whether it's membership or even for the Wild Music Institute. And now that the brand has debuted, you're able to go to the Carnegie Hall shop and purchase your own gear, whether it's in that Carnegie Hall Red with the new logo on it, or you have the Carnegie Hall monogram on a cap, or I can't wait to see people walking down the street in the Carnegie Hall monogram socks. And lastly, Sarah, you want to talk about the
Sure.
storytelling?
So, we also included an article on our website where we really told the story of why. If you think back to one of those quotes that Bobby shared from earlier in the presentation, you might remember that our donors needed to be brought along for the ride. And I would say same thing for all of our core audiences. So, also, just in the spirit of being transparent, we wanted to tell people why we were doing this. And then we also put together a marketing campaign to promote it across our platforms, including social media. We did some targeted emails to donors where we explained the new colors and their connection to them, and had a lot of fun with it. So that was that. And I
Oh,
think,
fine.
oh, yes, we're here.
So finally, we'll leave you with a few lessons learned. And so we have a few lessons. Sarah and I will alternate through these, but I will start because the questions are so important. But those were important for us all because we wanted to challenge biases. We needed to think beyond what we already knew of Carnegie Hall and pave a way forward.
Keep asking questions. We talked a lot about questions during this entire presentation, and we are still asking questions right now and looking forward. So keep asking questions.
Well, we also think it's important to surround yourself with the work. So, in a lot of the applications that Sarah was able to share, we had the actual physical pieces. And so we pinned them up on our walls all around the office, and we surrounded ourselves with all the work that was being created at Carnegie Hall so we could start to see the consistencies and the inconsistencies so that we could figure out the best way to address those needs.
Start with the must have versus the nice to have. So, of course, we were doing this in the midst of a global pandemic. Resources had shifted both from a staff bandwidth time, but also for our budgets. Everything had changed. So, we carved out what was really essential to make this launch what it was and communicated that to our colleagues. And then we've given ourselves a nice runway to actually finalize the execution of this launch.
Stay grounded in the strategy. Use that strategy as your framework for all that you do. Now, don't make sure that in doing that, it provides a platform and inspiration. You don't want it to become something that is paralyzing. And I think in the way that that strategy is developed, it should be providing more opportunities for work to get developed in a way that speaks to who you actually are.
Tell the story of why. We shared that article. I think now more than ever, we have all learned as arts administrators just how important it is to be transparent about who we are and why we're doing the things that we're doing. So tell the story of why.
Actively encourage feedback. As you can imagine, doing this work, it can feel somewhat personal. You put so much into it. However, you can't just do it without sharing it with the world. What we really needed to do was get feedback from all of those that we were working with, all of our different partners and stakeholders within Carnegie Hall, and then it was important for us to just shut up and listen to what people were saying, read between the lines, and try to get down to the core of their needs.
And finally, design for the best and the worst. I think as arts administrators, we've all seen examples of this. You might have an ad that only has a couple of pieces of information in it. You might have one that has 10 or more. So part of that was actively testing, actively trying to meet the very best and the worst scenarios in all formats so that we could be as flexible and efficient as we needed to be when it came to actually doing this work in real life.
All right. So thank you very much. And we'll leave you with one more, which is
Practice.
practice.
Practice. Thank you.
Thank you all.